What if the real crisis shaking the royal family right now isn't happening on palace balconies or public stages, but inside marriages that once looked untouchable? Because behind the glittering image of royal unity, a quiet storm is brewing around two sisters who were never supposed to be the center of a royal scandal. And yet suddenly, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie are standing in the middle of a situation so tense, so politically delicate, that insiders are whispering about fractures spreading through the York family like cracks in royal glass. The British monarchy has survived wars, abdications, financial crises, and scandals that would have destroyed almost any other institution in the modern world. For centuries, the House of Windsor has operated like a fortress, absorbing pressure, closing ranks, and projecting calm to the outside world even when chaos was swirling behind palace doors. But something about this moment feels different, something deeper. Because what's happening around Beatrice and Eugenie is not just another headline, it's beginning to look like the early stages of a quiet royal reset. For years, the York sisters occupied a strange position inside the royal ecosystem. They were royal enough to carry prestige, yet distant enough from the throne to live what looked like modern lives. Not quite working royals, but never fully private citizens either. It was a delicate balance that seemed to work perfectly. Their weddings looked like fairy tale confirmations that the monarchy could evolve with the modern world. Beatrice married Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi, a sophisticated property developer with aristocratic roots. Eugenie married Jack Brooksbank, a charismatic businessman tied to luxury hospitality circles. On paper, it looked flawless, royal heritage blended with global business networks, tradition mixed with modern independence. But beneath that polished image, something was slowly shifting, quietly, almost invisibly. The turning point came when the Jeffrey Epstein scandal surged back into global headlines and dragged their father, Prince Andrew, into one of the most damaging controversies the monarchy has faced in decades. Suddenly, the York name, once a glamorous passport into elite circles, became something far heavier. Invitations that once arrived effortlessly began disappearing. Business partners started asking cautious questions. The tone of media coverage hardened. Curiosity turned into scrutiny. And the pressure didn't stay contained within newspapers. It seeped into boardrooms, private meetings, and eventually into the personal lives of the York sisters themselves. Because when reputations become radioactive, the fallout spreads outward like ripples in dark water. For Jack Brooksbank and Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi, the situation created a problem no businessman ever wants to face. Questions about reputation that had nothing to do with their own actions. Their careers exist in worlds where perception is currency. Luxury brands, international investors, elite social networks. These environments operate on trust and image. When the York name began appearing beside headlines about Epstein and Andrew, the professional atmosphere around them changed almost overnight. Meetings suddenly carried an uncomfortable subtext. Conversations that should have been about investments or partnerships drifted toward cautious references to scandal. And even when nobody spoke the words out loud, everyone in the room knew exactly what the elephant was. The York name, the shadow following it, and the risk of standing too close. But here's where the story becomes far more complicated than a simple reputational crisis. Because insiders inside royal circles have been quietly hinting at something else unfolding behind palace walls. Something strategic, something deliberate. According to those whispers, the monarchy itself is undergoing a transformation, one designed to reshape the royal structure for the future reign of Prince William. A leaner monarchy, fewer public figures, tighter control of the royal narrative, a smaller circle representing the crown. And if that strategy is real, then suddenly the problems surrounding Beatrice and Eugenie stop looking like unfortunate accidents and start looking like collateral damage in a much larger institutional shift. Think about it. For decades, the royal family functioned like a wide constellation. Numerous relatives carried titles, supported charities, attended ceremonies, and represented the monarchy across society. It was messy sometimes, chaotic even, but it allowed multiple branches of the family to remain visible. That system, however, has been quietly shrinking. Over the past few years, palace strategists have moved toward what they call a streamlined monarchy. The logic is brutally simple. Focus public attention on the direct line of succession, the king, the prince and princess of Wales, and their children. Reduce the prominence of everyone else. Protect the brand of the crown at all costs. Inside that new royal blueprint, the York branch suddenly looks dangerously vulnerable. Once Prince Andrew's controversies exploded into a global scandal, his name stopped functioning as an asset to the monarchy and became a liability. Every appearance risked reopening the Epstein conversation. Every photograph threatened to drag the royal narrative back into the same uncomfortable spotlight. From the perspective of palace advisors tasked with protecting the institution's image, the situation presented a brutal choice: absorb the reputational damage or quietly create distance. And according to people watching closely, that distance may already be happening. Invitations to major royal events becoming more selective, public appearances more tightly controlled, communications communications teams focusing their messaging almost entirely on senior working royals, one small adjustment at a time. Each decision on its own looking harmless, administrative, practical. But taken together, they send a message that echoes quietly through royal circles. The York branch is no longer central to the monarchy's future narrative. For Beatrice and Eugenie, the consequences of that shift are deeply personal. Their entire identities were built around a hybrid life, royal by birth, independent by career. Their marriages symbolized that balance. But when the York name became entangled with scandal again, the ripple effects started reshaping their worlds. Business partners became cautious, media attention intensified, and inside their homes conversations began changing. Plans for the future replaced by discussions about headlines, strategies for managing public perception, questions about loyalty, reputation, and survival. The kind of conversations that slowly drain the optimism from even the strongest relationships. And if that is what's happening behind palace walls, then the pressure on the York sisters and their marriages may only be just beginning. If the quiet transformation inside the monarchy truly began years ago, then what Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie are experiencing today may not be a sudden collapse at all, but the final stage of a slow structural shift that has been unfolding behind palace walls for much longer than the public realizes. Because once the royal institution began redefining who would represent the crown in the decades ahead, everything surrounding the York branch started to change in subtle but unmistakable ways. At first, the changes looked small: administrative, technical, security arrangements quietly reviewed, invitations to major royal events becoming more selective, public appearances arranged with increasing caution. On paper, these adjustments could easily be explained as routine modernization, but when viewed together, they formed a pattern that royal watchers could not ignore. The York sisters were gradually moving away from the center of royal life and toward the uncertain edge of the institution that had defined their identities since birth. For Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, this shift was not just symbolic. It reached directly into the structure of their daily lives. For decades, extended members of the royal family had operated within an invisible framework of institutional support. Security coordination, travel planning, advisory teams, logistical infrastructure, all the mechanisms that allowed royal life to function smoothly without ever appearing in headlines. But when the monarchy began streamlining its structure, that invisible safety net began to thin. Support systems were reassessed. Resources tied to non-working royals were reconsidered. Privileges that had once been taken for granted suddenly looked less certain. And within the royal world, these signals carry enormous meaning. Because protection by the crown does not only represent physical security, it represents status, institutional endorsement, and a clear place within the royal hierarchy. When that protection begins to fade, the message spreads quickly through elite social and professional circles. Suddenly, the York name no longer carried the same automatic authority it once did. For the husbands of the two sisters, the implications were immediate and deeply practical. Jack Brooksbank and Edoardo Mapelli operate in professional environments where reputation functions like currency. High-level investors, luxury brands, international business networks, these circles thrive on trust, discretion, and the perception of stability. When the York name began appearing repeatedly alongside renewed headlines about Prince Andrew and the Epstein scandal, the atmosphere around those professional relationships changed. Investors began asking cautious questions. Partners wondered about long-term reputational risks. Deals that once moved forward effortlessly required more explanation, more reassurance, more careful management. In industries where image shapes opportunity, even the suggestion of controversy can alter the entire landscape of a career. Inside the York households, the emotional consequences of that environment slowly became impossible to ignore. Beatrice and Eugenie remained fiercely loyal to their father despite the relentless storm surrounding him. From a human perspective, that loyalty was understandable. Public attention increasingly centered on the Prince and Princess of Wales and their children, figures carefully presented as the stable future of the monarchy. Their appearances emphasized unity, service, and continuity, messages designed to reassure the public that the crown remained strong despite the turbulence surrounding other members of the family. Against that carefully managed narrative, the York sisters appeared to drift further toward the margins of royal life. Their presence at major events became less frequent. Their roles within official communications diminished. Slowly, almost quietly, the contrast between the monarchy's future story and the uncertain place of the York branch became impossible to ignore. For observers watching these developments unfold, the central question began to change. At first, many believed Beatrice and Eugenie were simply enduring the inevitable fallout from their father's scandal. But as the institutional transformation inside the monarchy became clearer, another possibility emerged. Perhaps the isolation of the York branch was not merely accidental. Perhaps it was also the predictable outcome of a monarchy determined to reinvent itself for the decades ahead. A monarchy focused on protecting its credibility by narrowing the circle of figures who represent it publicly. If that interpretation is correct, then the challenges facing Beatrice and Eugenie are not only personal hardships, they are the human consequences of a centuries-old institution adapting to survive in a world where reputation moves faster than tradition. The royal family has always been both a family and an institution, and those two identities do not always coexist peacefully. Personal loyalty can demand one path while institutional survival demands another. In moments of crisis, those two forces collide, forcing choices that few individuals inside the royal household ever expected to face. The York sisters now stand directly at that intersection. Their loyalty to their father remains unwavering, yet that same loyalty ties them to a controversy the monarchy appears determined to move beyond. Their marriages, once celebrated as symbols of modern royal independence, now operate under pressures that few couples could fully understand. And the institution they were born into continues evolving into something leaner, more strategic, and less forgiving of complications that might threaten its carefully managed public image. Whether Beatrice and Eugenie will ultimately redefine their lives beyond the center of royal life remains an open question. They may continue navigating the difficult balance between royal heritage and private independence, building futures that exist largely outside the institution's spotlight. Or they may discover that their connection to the monarchy becomes increasingly ceremonial rather than influential as the royal structure continues to narrow around the direct line of succession. But one reality is already clear. The story unfolding around the York sisters is no longer simply about scandal or strained marriages. It is about how the modern monarchy decides who remains part of its future and who gradually fades into the background as the institution reshapes itself for survival in a new era. And as that transformation continues quietly behind palace walls, the tension surrounding Beatrice and Eugenie lingers like a question the royal family itself may still be struggling to answer. In the end, the monarchy may survive this moment just as it has survived countless crises